We're on the verge of a historic upheaval with a move that could change the equation in Gaza forever. Starting tonight, we get to know Operation Oz Vecherev, which means in Hebrew, strength and sword. We'll take a look at how the IDF surprised Hamas and the preparations that made it possible to decapitate the senior leadership of the terrorist organization within minutes, along with hundreds of rank-and-file members of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist organizations. The targets of the airstrike were mainly Hamas middle-ranked officers, including company commanders, battalion commanders, deputy battalion commanders, and senior figures in Hamas's government. As large as these strikes were, they are meant to give Hamas the motivation it needs to reach a deal on returning the remaining Israeli hostages. If these strikes don't move them to take this step, there will be more steps taken, including the final step of renewing a ground operation, and Israel's leadership believes that this strategy will enable the destruction of Hamas's governing capabilities in Gaza. Speaking of Israel's political leadership, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that from now on, we are conducting negotiations under fire. From now on, Israel will act with increasing intensity. He also spoke about combining forces with the United States against the Houthis and sent a message to Tehran by saying, "We have work to do against other parts of the axis of evil." On Israel's northern border, the IDF attacked artillery positions in Syria that posed a threat to the Jewish state, while the defense ministers of Syria and Lebanon signed an agreement to end 2 days of clashes between Hezbollah and forces loyal to al-Julani in Syria. As for Hezbollah, their weak response to the resumption of Israeli strikes on Hamas in Gaza indicates their weakened condition. Although Hezbollah issued a statement condemning the Israeli actions, they did not threaten to attack Israel themselves or even declare support for Hamas. Meanwhile, a ballistic missile fired from Yemen at Israel was successfully intercepted by the Arrow system over Saudi airspace before crossing into the Israeli territory. TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will bring us to the Houthis' statements that we are at war with the United States and also explain why Iran has urgently asked them to calm down. Despite this request by Tehran, the Houthis are actually threatening to escalate their attacks, saying that in the coming hours and days, we will expand the circle of targets in Israel until the current situation with the operation in Gaza is halted. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 530 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region who are operating under the direction of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Our Rebuild Israel campaign is ongoing, so be part of restoring hope. Visit the address that you see on the screen and make a difference in Israel today. Early Tuesday morning, the IDF launched a large-scale strike on Hamas in the Gaza Strip, involving approximately 80 targets attacked simultaneously. The strike, which lasted less than 10 minutes, was carried out to the complete surprise of Hamas and was the result of meticulous operational preparation that lasted several weeks. Operation Oz Vecherev, strength and sword in Hebrew, which began last night in Gaza, was one of the largest preemptive decapitation attacks in military history. In a coordinated action that lasted just a few minutes, hundreds of terrorists and senior Hamas members were eliminated thanks to an extraordinary collaboration between the Shin Bet and the Air Force. It began at 2 a.m. and involved units of the Air Force and the Navy of the Israeli military. The operation was conceived by the Southern Command, the Air Force, the Intelligence Directorate, and the Shin Bet. It was meant to achieve an operational effect similar to the Beepers operation, which was carried out against Hezbollah in Lebanon last September. However, this was a more traditional military attack that required very careful planning by the Shin Bet based on predicting exactly where dozens of specific Hamas operatives would be and exactly when they would be there so they could be hit. Preparations for the operation began many weeks ago, and the Shin Bet continuously conducted refinements. The two bars, Shin Bet head Ronen Bar and Air Force Commander Tomer Bar, led their teams on one side intelligence and on the other side operational capability. The objective was that within a window of seconds, up to a minute, all strike targets would be attacked simultaneously. This would both deliver the opening blow and shatter operational capabilities, stunning Hamas exactly as happened to Hezbollah in the Beepers operation in Lebanon. In order to carry out this operation, the Air Force was required to assemble an armada of aircraft and vehicles of different types, including UAVs, attack helicopters, and fighter jets. The Shin Bet had to ensure until the very last moment that all strike targets were in the locations that were supposed to be attacked, and also to ensure that no hostages or uninvolved civilians were in the area. Only after Ronen Bar received the green light from his people did he allow the Air Force Commander Major General Tomer Bar to give the order to strike. The Air Force says that was a complex operation that required coordination between many dozens of aircraft operating in a confined and crowded area, with all of them carrying out the strike simultaneously. The entire package of strikes lasted just over half an hour, targeting dozens of objectives in Rafah, Khan Yunis, the central camps, Gaza City, and the northern part of the Gaza Strip. The targets included terraced homes, headquarters, tunnels, warehouses, and bases that Hamas had rebuilt in recent days. As a result of the strike, the Rafah crossing was closed until further notice, and the IDF spokesperson's unit in Arabic called on residents of the Gaza Strip living in areas close to the border fence to move westward. The entire Air Force is currently mobilized for offensive operations in order to thwart the efforts of Hamas to carry out additional attacks, build up forces, and rearm. The IDF says that attack will continue as necessary and may expand beyond aerial operations. It is very important to point out that these strikes were carried out after no progress was made in negotiations for the last 3 weeks, and the IDF prepared the operational plan at the directive of the political echelon that leads the negotiations with the mediators. Beyond that, the background to the decision to expand military activity is the political echelon's assessments that negotiations are stuck. An IDF statement said, "We have a developing plan in phases and varying intensities against Hamas, managed with continuous situation assessments. We are presenting our professional recommendations to the political echelon. We conducted a situation assessment today with the Hostage Directorate and Chief of Staff Zamir, toured the Gaza Strip, met with commanders in the Givati Brigade, and inspected the forces' readiness and preparedness." The IDF also admitted that Hamas was recently preparing to carry out attacks on IDF outposts along the border of the Gaza Strip. And regarding the risk to the hostages, the IDF said that there is a clear directive from the Chief of Staff to take all measures to be cautious, and we are aware that we do not always have all the intelligence. In other words, the IDF acknowledges that there is a risk to the safety of the hostages, although they will do everything possible to minimize that risk. Since the initial wave of strikes began early Tuesday morning, senior officials in Hamas's government offices responsible for the organization's governments in the Gaza Strip were confirmed to have been eliminated. According to reports in Arab media portals, this included senior Hamas figure Issam El-Dalasses. He was a member of the organization's political bureau responsible for running civilian affairs in the Gaza Strip, but he won't be doing that any longer. It was also reported that Hamas Deputy Minister Mahmoud Abu Watfa was eliminated, as well as 2 more members of the political bureau, Mohammed El-Jamasi and Yasser Harb. On Tuesday evening, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement saying that together with the Defense Minister, I accepted the IDF's recommendation to return to intense combat against Hamas. From here on out, Israel will act against Hamas with increasing intensity, and from now on, negotiations will be conducted only under fire. In the last day, Hamas has felt the might of our arm. I want to assure you and them, this is only the beginning. We will continue to fight to achieve all the war's objectives. Gaza will not pose a threat to Israel. And referring to the relatives of the hostages whose loved ones are still held captive, he added, all our hearts are with them. They are going through an impossible nightmare every day and every minute. He then addressed the families directly, saying, we are committed to your loved ones, our loved ones, both the living and the fallen. It was already proven in the 2 previous pauses in Gaza, during which we released 196 hostages. A simple fact, military pressure is a necessary condition for the release of more hostages. They are not contradictory goals, they are intertwined. We are in the midst of the war of revival, the war of 7 fronts. The Prime Minister also referred to the launch carried out by the Houthis this evening towards the Beersheba area and the Negev in Israel and issued an implicit threat to Iran, saying, I very much appreciate the combined efforts with the Americans against the branch. We have a big job to do with other parts of the axis of evil as well. I am certain we can handle them and we will defeat them, God willing. Together we will do, and together we will win. We at TBN Israel will continue to update you about the return of fighting in the Gaza Strip, and will bring you the most accurate information from the ground. So stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Click that subscribe button to help us spread the truth farther. It's important to understand some things regarding the return of fighting in the Gaza Strip. Following President Trump's meeting with the released Israeli hostages earlier this month, he threatened Hamas that if they do not release all the captives, they will face severe consequences. He also promised to send Israel everything it needs to complete the mission. It is possible that this commitment includes supplying weapons that were previously withheld under the Biden administration, such as large caliber bombs and bulldozer parts. Despite this support, there are those who claim that Hamas cannot be destroyed by military means. According to many, this assumption not only misrepresents history, but also ignores the shifting reality in the military and the political arena. Ignoring the IDF's capability to stop Hamas militarily disregards the constraints that the IDF faced over the last 16 months and the unprecedented opportunities it will have in the future. It might be difficult to believe this, but during the first phase of the fighting, the IDF was forced to operate under severe restrictions at the insistence of various parties. To start with, Arab countries, primarily Egypt, exerted pressure on Israel to carry out military operations in a way that would not lead to a mass relocation of civilian populations from areas in Gaza to safe zones outside the conflict zone. Hamas exploited the situation and used civilians and hostages as human shields, creating sanctuaries in places that the IDF avoided entering. At that stage, there was an idea of temporarily relocating the civilian population to neighboring areas, which could have altered the balance of battle and removed one of Hamas's major advantages. Additionally, the IDF faced political constraints from outside. The Biden administration and others placed limits on the IDF's actions, including imposing excessive expectations to avoid civilian casualties and pressure to stop fighting in strategic locations such as Rafah. However, if military operations continue, they may proceed under different conditions, as the IDF is expected to receive increased political support, resulting in fewer constraints on its actions. But the operations might not continue for very long. However, if military operations continue, they may proceed under different conditions, as the IDF is expected to receive increased political support, resulting in fewer constraints on its actions. But the operations might not continue for very long. The Saudi news portal El Arabiya reports that the mediators are negotiating and attempting to release a number of hostages in exchange for the renewal of the ceasefire, and this was confirmed by diplomatic sources quoted in other news reports. However, this is a war of survival for the people of Israel, and we know exactly what the master plan of Hamas and their allies is for us. So we're not going to let them accomplish it. Here at TBN Israel, we work hard to bring you the truth. And if you want to create more videos like this one, help us and support us. With a small monthly donation or a large one, you can be part of the Boots on the Ground family. So go to www.tbnisrael.com/give and donate to us, because every dollar of yours will be invested in spreading the truth about what is happening in Israel. And speaking of what's happening here in Israel, on Tuesday evening, sirens sounded throughout the Negev region following the launch of a ballistic missile from Yemen. The Arrow interceptor was launched from Eilat area in the south of Israel, while residents reported a distant explosion heard from Beersheba. Later reports indicate that the missile, which had been fired at Israel by the Houthis in Yemen, was intercepted before it crossed into the Israeli airspace. After a long period of quiet on the Yemeni front, the Air Force was prepared for the possibility that the Houthis would carry out their threat in the coming day and attempt to fire towards Israel. The Iranian militia in Yemen also announced that it will renew naval attacks against Israel, claiming it is in response to the halt of aid that is entering the Gaza Strip. And on that note, let's hear from TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani as he updates us on the shift of power in our neighborhood and how the American strike in Yemen changed the power map in the Middle East. Over to you, Mati.
If last week's events were marked by a very, very slow progression of events, then this week everything is back to normal in the Middle East. That is to say that things are moving, or events are moving, at an incredibly rapid speed. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the change in the U.S. relations to Iran, to the Houthis, and what's been happening in Israel. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen this very slow progression between the U.S., Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranians, the Houthis, and then there was a mix of the Russians also in sort of the big pot of ongoing events and changes in the region. And this week, we're looking at something incredibly different. These last couple of days have seen a dramatic increase in military activity in this region, both by Israel and by the U.S. We're going to focus in the next couple minutes on what the U.S. has been saying, and more importantly, what the U.S. has been doing in this region. So let's go. President Trump makes a very incredible, very unique, very interesting declaration just a few days ago, and he says to the Iranians, we're sort of unmasking, we're pulling off the veil over your actions through proxies. In other words, everything that you do through the Houthis in Yemen is no longer considered Houthis. We're looking at it as if you, the Iranian government, were the ones to carry out that attack. His words were, every bullet that they fire is a bullet that you fired. This comes after a very long series of, well, it's weeks at this point, of ever-increasing threats and actions by the Houthi rebels in Yemen against U.S. surface vessels, ships in the area, and against the Saudis and against vessels traveling through the sea. To remind everyone, the reason the Houthis are such an important proxy and topic of conversation is the fact that they sit on the straits leading into the Suez Canal. Much of the global trade, I don't remember the exact number, we're talking double-digit percentage of global GDP travels by Yemen on its way to the Suez Canal. That includes a ton of oil, not a ton, it includes many, many tons of oil. It includes an incredible amount of goods traveling from the east to the west and vice versa. So they sit on a very, very vital route of passage through the sea channels. And when the Houthis start threatening, and when they start firing, and when they start destabilizing the region, that signals to the global economy and the powers that be that they might be looking at a downscale of economic activity in this region. And that is bad news for everyone, specifically for the new U.S. administration that's looking to do the exact opposite. They're looking to stabilize and strengthen relationships in this region. So what are we looking at? The Houthis have been a threat to passage through the sea. They've attacked U.S. ships, Israeli ships. They've said openly many, many times that they will continue to do so as long as Israel doesn't withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Well, we all know this is an excuse. What the Houthis are is an extended arm of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to destabilize the region and strengthen their stake and their power in this entire game. And this comes after weeks of negotiations between the US administration and the Iranian administration talking about dismantling their nuclear program, or I should say their military nuclear program, and taking them back to a place where they don't have one, and they're looking at, or they're trying to look at, removing some of the sanctions. The U.S. has now taken up, and this is several weeks in the making, taking a much more aggressive stance in the negotiation. What does it look like? The U.S. has said under President Trump two main things. One, we can go the route of negotiations in which you're going to leave or at least roll back your nuclear military program. We're going to remove some of the sanctions and we can go on to business as usual in this part of the world. But, and this is a big but that didn't exist in the past, if you don't play with us on these terms, we do have a military option and we will use that military option. Now, the Iranians are clever. They're never going to go out full out and say, we reject everything. They stall, they pull time, they move slowly. And then, when the time is right, they use a proxy to send a message. President Trump did something clever and also very, very bold. He said to them, no more of this proxy games. We're looking at you through the lens of the proxies and what they're doing, and whatever action they take, we will respond to you, the Iranian government. And that's a very unique place to be in this region. Everyone is looking at what's happening right now. Not just Israel, not just the US, also the Saudis are looking. Also other countries in this region are paying close attention to the way this is going to roll or pan out between the US, the Iranians, and of course Israel is always in the mix. Saudis have been talking about coming back to the negotiation table to be part of a greater accords or greater, let's call it a normalization agreement in this region, in which they will be part of a US-led coalition. And what they're looking to get from that is the US guaranteeing that they'll be protected against the Iranians. And now that's on the table. Now the US is taking direct action against Iranian proxies in a way that we haven't seen before. 6 to 8 months ago, there were a series of statements that came out from the US administration, from within the US Navy, of high-level officials or high-level officers within the Navy speaking against the US policy as it relates to Houthi rebels. And it wasn't that the army was working wrong as far as tactics went. It was a statement saying you can't really win a war if you're playing defense. And that's exactly what President Trump is going against right now. No longer playing defense against the Iranians, but being proactive and making very bold and very strong threats against them. And all of that, from where I'm standing right now in Israel, is a great thing for us. Because what we need in this region right now is clarity of mind, clarity of statements, and clarity of actions. We've been for weeks, and we were talking about this last week, at a place where we're going back and forth with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with the Iranians, and it feels like everything was sticky and moving slowly. And right now, this week, has sort of broken the scab off that. We're back into moving full speed in a positive direction. At the same time as the US is dealing with the Iranians, Israel went back to dealing with Hamas that's been stalling endlessly when it comes to the next phase of the agreement. And it all makes sense when you look at the greater scheme of things. Both Israel and the US are pushing forward to a resolution, because that's what we need in this region. We can't endlessly negotiate and go back and forth with the same problem for years. We've been at a place where now clarity is needed in both the actions and the statements made by the governments. President Trump has led a very, very bold line of let's call it negotiations when it comes to Iran, and when making their statements about what they're planning to do in this region. And that is all very good news for the people of the Middle East. For Israel, we have a strong ally in the White House that is promoting and helping us and encouraging us to finish the war with Hamas and to bring home all the hostages, something the Israelis care dearly about. And then with the Iranians, something that's been on the headlines in Israel for most of my adult life, the US administration is taking a bold and clear line against their actions of destabilization in the region, fighting against their proxies, calling out their bluff on proxy warfare, and their statements of lack of involvement and lack of engagement and independence of the Houthi rebels and all that jazz that they've been stating for a very long time. And instead of that, saying, we want to negotiate with you, and if you don't play along in the very near future, we're coming to get you. And I think that's a good thing. We need swift, decisive, clear actions, clear statements to bring a resolution to the Iranian nuclear program, to the problem with Hamas, to the need to reshape the relationship and balance of power in this region and pull in Egypt, pull in Jordan, pull in the Saudis into a more stable relationship. I don't want to call it a peace agreement, but let's call it a trade and partnership agreement that will bring a season of good to this region. Because we've seen enough wars, we've seen enough conflict, now it's time for a time of prosperity and peace. And it seems like we have the right people at the helm in the White House and definitely in the Israeli government. Anyway, you have to stay on top of everything that's happening here. Make sure to share, subscribe, and like our content to keep on top of everything that's happening in this part of the world. And now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you, Mati, for clarifying these matters for us. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development regarding the conflict with the Houthis in Yemen. A moment before we move on to our northern border with Lebanon and Syria and the escalation there, I want to invite you to click the subscribe button so that you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, switching our focus to the northern arena, Tuesday, some more Israeli strikes in Syrian territory. This time, it was artillery cannons located in the Khan Arnabach area in southern Syria that had been determined to be a threat to the state of Israel. In this context, we must add that it was reported earlier that the defense ministers of Syria and Lebanon had signed an agreement to begin ceasefire after deadly clashes that began on Sunday and had continued for 2 days. These clashes, which claimed lives on both sides, were primarily between Hezbollah forces and forces loyal to the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Julani, which rules in Damascus, but the National Army and some local militias were also involved. A joint statement by the Syrian and the Lebanese defense ministries said that an agreement has been reached on a ceasefire between the two sides, with continued communication between the intelligence directorate of the Lebanese army and the Syrian intelligence to prevent the situation on the border between the two countries from deteriorating and to prevent the loss of innocent civilian lives. The guns have fallen silent on the Syrian-Lebanese border for now, but there could be another flare-up at any time, and there almost doesn't ever need to be a reason. So, for that matter, the mayor of the village in Lebanon reported that despite the ceasefire agreement, Syrian soldiers were still inside the village engaging in looting. In a related story, Hezbollah referred to Israel's renewed strikes in the Gaza Strip in a statement on Tuesday saying, "We emphasize our support for the Palestinian resistance and the people of Gaza. We call on Arab and Islamic nations and all freedom lovers to expose the American Zionist partnership in the war against the Palestinians. We demand that the international community take urgent action to stop this." This remarkably unremarkable statement reveals, among other things, the depths to which Hezbollah's domestic position and overall power have diminished in recent months. Since the previously mentioned Beeper operation in September of last year, Hezbollah has suffered heavy losses in the war with Israel, and the new political and military appointments in Lebanon were not its first choice and did not improve its internal position. Additionally, the damage to the Iranian Shiite axis and the upheaval in Syria do not help the status of the Lebanese terrorist organization at this time. All of these factors do not allow it to drag Lebanon into another war and be responsible for destroying the state's rebuilding after the war. Such a possibility would only increase criticism against it, claiming it dragged Lebanon into wars that are not its own. However, it should be noted that in recent weeks, senior Hezbollah officials have issued threats that the organization's patience also has limits, but Hezbollah will need a very good excuse to justify going to war against Israel once again. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development, and we ask you to help us spread the truth by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and above all, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If there is something that I learned from more than 500 days of war, is that our God is faithful, and He's the only one that has all the answers. The other thing is that prayers work. God listens to our prayers and performs miracles on a daily basis. I have seen so many miracles during this war, from missiles landing near IDF troops and not exploding, to feeling the peace of God personally in the middle of the Gaza Strip. So please, it's very important to continue praying for Israel now that the fighting has resumed. Come and pray for the peace of the hostages who are held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Continue praying that they will return safely to their families in Israel as soon as possible. Pray for the IDF soldiers wherever they are, in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, or in Judea and Samaria. pray for the peace of Israel, and most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.